Hey everyone, Crewcaster here. Today we're going to be talking about an interesting new weapon series that just dropped for New Genesis. This is the second 9-star series that we've gotten so far, and this is the Verschmelz weapon series, as shown here. This is the katana, but it's available for all weapons in the game. The reason why it's so interesting is because of its potential. A lot of people have been questioning on whether it's going to not because of this thing, but as the big bonus of this one, it gives 100% critical hit rate, so every single attack that you do with this weapon is going to crit. So all of those crit damage multipliers will happen every single time. You get like a base of 20% increase with the damage, and then you can get some more with add-on skills and fixes. But as a penalty with this weapon, you have a negative potency attached to it. At level 1, it's negative 25%, but it goes all the way down to negative 14%. But it's still a big penalty to this, because all their weapons are getting, extra potency instead of negative by a huge margin. You can see things up to like 30-some% with the Neos Astrian. So a lot of people have been wondering if this is actually good or not, even with all of that critical hit rate. But we'll figure that out and more as we go along. First things first, where do you obtain this weapon? Well, you do the new quest, Lucille Exploration. So that's where you go up into the floating island and complete a whole bunch of sectors, and then kill a boss at the end with a whole bunch of modifiers. For this, you need to have a battle power of 3615. You can access it in the quest counter with the Lucille Exploration tab right there. But with this, it's just a chance drop inside, but you also get this material called Growth Mint, which you get a varying amount depending on the rank that you get at the end of the quest, where you get up to 1 to 4, and you use 50 of these in the Growth Mint exchange shop that got added at the item trader, and you can exchange it for one of those weapons. Or if you get 300 of these, then you can get a Termina 1 version. That Termina version being very nice for this particular weapon series because it's critting all the time. With a Termina, it gives you a critical damage boost or critical potency at plus 6% at its minimum at level 1. So that's happening with every single attack, and if you get higher and higher Terminas, it's just going to be more guaranteed damage, more so than a Fixa attack would with other weapons. But that exchange shop and doing Lucille Exploration are the only ways to get this weapon series because it is not tradable in the personal shop. So you can't buy it off some other player, you have to earn it yourself. For other things worth mentioning about this weapon series is that some stats just do not matter at all because they have no effect due to the 100% crit rate you get from its potential. One of those things being floor potency, which for those of you who don't know, is that it raises the minimum damage you can do, but not your maximum damage you can do. So it shortens the range or variance of damage numbers that you see, so they're more consistently higher. But with 100% crit rate, you're always hitting the top end of your damage all the time, so floor potency has no effect. Another thing is getting extra crit rate. Getting any crit rate beyond 100% just doesn't do anything because you're already critting all the time anyways. It doesn't like overflow into like extra crit damage or something like that. It just doesn't work that way. For examples of what doesn't really work with this weapon series in terms of augments, there is Ult Secreta. That floor potency just goes to waste, and now it's just a 2.5% potency capsule with negatives attached, so that's just god-awful. There's Dreadkeeper. This already was kind of low on the DPS end, but you lose out on all of that potency floor, so now it's just a tankier capsule, I guess, so you could still use it for that, but I really wouldn't recommend. Then there's a thing like High Ale Domina that also loses out on the potency floor. The original version is a 3% potency capsule, so you might be able to still use it because it does fit a different category, but it still just loses some value. Then for a class that you really want to use for this weapon is Slayer as a subclass or a main class. You wouldn't want to use Verschmelz because of all the crit rate that it gets out of it that benefits all the other weapons in the game and not this one. The skills that I'm talking about are things like the critical up, which just gives you straight critical rate, the Gallant attack critical up, so when facing bosses you get more critical hit rate, and then just like other things throughout the tree that focus on their skills that give them more critical rate that just all go to nothing. So with that all said, you may now realize why everybody is just so confused on these weapon series. So let's move into experimentation with it in-game just to see some of the numbers, but then also afterwards move into a damage chart for theorized numbers on just how well it stacks up with everything else. So for the experimentation, I have this Verschmelz Katana plus 70, has 992 attack at its maximum, and it has the level 6 potential as showed before, with negative 14% potency and 100% critical hit rate. And it has all of these different augments, which adds up to 22% melee potency. Then for the other thing I'm comparing it to is the Neos Astrian Katana plus 70, kind of like the closest thing to it right now that a lot of people have. This has a level 6 potential, which has a 38% potency, has some Photon Blast stuff, but we're not going to include that because I'm not going to use the Photon Blast. And then it has a Fixed Attack 1, which gives it a couple potency that it doesn't show in here, but it has 18.2% melee potency. So it's like 20.2-ish with the Fixed Attack. Also gets the floor out of everything else. So the Alt Secreta and whatever else that I have on my armor, which is Mastery 4, Aegis Soul, Addy Deft Melra, Alt Secreta, Half Finale, and Might 4, which adds up to 24.1% potency on each of these three. So the Verschmelz isn't getting anything out of the floor potency from those different capsules, but it is getting everything from the potency just the same. So for the overall potency of the Astrian, we have 126.4% melee potency on the character sheet. That doesn't factor in the potential, so it does have like a 38% on top of that. And then for the Verschmelz, it was 133.6% on the character sheet, but it has that negative 14% to factor in. So it's kind of like a big gap there, but the Verschmelz is critical all the time, plus it has a higher attack of about 100 with the 992 versus 894, I believe it is. Then for add-on skills, this matters quite a bit too, because critical hit rate up, that applies to the Astrian and not the, Verschmelz, because critical hit rate does nothing. But the fighter add-on is huge for Verschmelz because every single attack, it's getting this potency, unlike the Astrian. And then there's other things in here that kind of factor a little bit, but not too much. So let's actually get into this though. So I used the Astrian first, and I used the normal attack, just the step 1 of the combo for both the Astrian and the Verschmelz. So the Astrian has like damage numbers between like 500, 600 most of the time, but it can get as low as like 400 something. But it can get as high as 891 if I do a critical hit. But, that critical hit isn't guaranteed like the Verschmelz. So it's just kind of like all over the place, and you may get lucky with your damage numbers in certain fights, or you may get, bad and unlucky with those lower damage numbers. But now looking at the Verschmelz, this is consistently 623 on that normal attack. So everything is just going to be that damage number. It's not going to change at all because of that 100% crit rate. So basically, as we see with this experimentation so far, it's if you care about consistency or not. So if you like having the same damage numbers all the time, and don't like that chance of, being high, being low, then this is something that you would go for. Now though, let's take a look at a more real fight with Bujin. The only restrictions that I put in place is that I do the Silverleaf Storm PA only, but I could counter in any way, shape, or form. And then for the numbers that we're going to be looking at, it's actually the DPS meter that they added in game. You can turn that on in the options, and it shows in the upper right of the screen. Starting with the Neos Astrian, we see that the DPS kind of goes around 2800 or 2700 on the lows, but with its highs, it gets some DPS of like 3200 or like in the 3100. So it's definitely all over the place in terms of DPS, but it's pretty consistently high, at least from what I saw, versus the Verschmelz. Because with the Verschmelz, it didn't do so hot. It was like around 2600 consistently or 2700s, but that's always lower than what the Astrian was doing. So what is the problem here? I think the main thing is that they're kind of relying on you using the Fixa Termina that you can get in the Growth Mint shop, because that Termina always applies to all of the attacks with the Verschmelz, unlike any other weapon in the game. Unfortunately, I, at the time of this recording, do not have one of those Fixa Termina ones to experiment with, but we can now take a look at the different weapon sheets to see how it all stacks up with the different weapons in the game. So warning, flashbang incoming, but here's all the different sheets. So I have multiple because of different scenarios with the classes. So this first one is just not using Slayer at all. Hunter Bouncer. This one's using Slayer as a subclass. And then this one's using Slayer as a main. So we'll take a look at all of those. But with all these, they have the same kind of add-on skills and other bonuses and whatnot. So So they'll have maxed out add-on skills, at least for now, until we check them later. And then it has Verschmelz as the weapon with best in slot augments for right now. Gladiosol, Hal Finale, Gigas Maste, Spirit Triple, XD Def Parfait, and High Ale Domina. And then this goes the same for all the armors, which are the new Octo armors, which you can also get from the Lucille Exploration. Before everybody goes crazy about me using these 2 augments down below, because as I said earlier, these floor potencies don't apply to Verschmelz, so why am I using them? Well, everything else in the game it does, and then this sheet uses this stuff for all the weapons at once. So any other option that I could use in this slot, like I would still use an XD, it could be a guard or spirit with the Verschmelz, but it doesn't give the Verschmelz any additional damage anyway, so might as well use the depth here to make it easier for everything else. And then with the High El Domino, there really isn't an option in this 6th slot that has a higher potency, so we're just going to put that there as well. Let's get into this though. As a reminder, this is the non-Slayer Hunter-Bouncer combination. For the Verschmelz no fixa compared to the no fixa Astrian, there's basically no difference. They're almost the same in terms of DPS. The Astrian is just a little bit less with the negative 0.55% DPS there. But once you start getting a fixa in the Astrian, it beats out a no fixa Verschmelz every time with the same augment setup. Now once you get into the Termina 1 guaranteed that you can get out of the Growthman Exchange, with that 6% guaranteed damage increase, then the Astrian's hurting a little bit. That's where you need a Fatale 4 at least, or Fatale 5, to be able to beat something like that out. But once you get a Termina 2 with the Verschmelz, either through the new enhancement preset skill system or by getting it to drop, that just beats out basically everything in the game outright. Except for the Tassaw weapon series, which that is going to smash everything in terms of Verschmelz if you are lucky enough to get that to drop. But I can only, get it in my dreams, basically. So I'm not going to compare it to too much with the Tassaw, but just keep in mind that Tassaw is still just like the best weapon in the game, period. One thing interesting to note about this is that the add-on skills have a big influence depending on what you have. So if we turn off the crit rate, then everything else starts losing out quite a bit. You see, it all went into the red, but if you have that crit damage, that's going to be helping out Verschmelz a lot, where the crit rate doesn't at all. But if we turn back on the crit rate and turn off the crit damage, then Verschmelz is going to be very bad. Like, all of this is just in the green almost. So almost every other weapon in the game is better. So you really need to have good add-on skills, at least the crit damage, for this to work. If you have like something lower, like a little bit off, so if you have like a 15 in crit damage, but a 20 in the crit rate for some reason, then these weapons will start getting a little bit better. But the Termina 1 of this still is pretty solid, even if you have a little bit lower of an add-on skill. As you see, still beats out like the Fixa Attack 4 of Astrian, the Fatale 2, and just all of the Termina for Astrian as well. Let's go to the next one, where you have a Slayer as your subclass. You're getting some benefit from the crit rate with those class skills. So the 3% from the critical up and the 2% from the extra boss critical rate. Looking at this with a baseline no fixa Verschmelz compared to the Astrian, you see that the Astrian starts getting a little bit better because it's getting that crit rate, while the Verschmelz just does nothing with it. But basically, you would just stick with the Astrian if you're using the Slayer subclass until you get a Termina 1 version, kind of like before. But now, all of the fixas have a little bit higher in terms of their DPS. So a Termina 1 only really compares to like a Fixa Attack 3, kind of a Fatale 2, Fatale 1, and a Termina 3 on the Astrian. So you definitely need to actually start getting a better Termina values with your Verschmelz to start beating out the Astrian in comparison to before. This also applies to every other weapon in the game too. You can start seeing more green numbers with other weapons. So like the Christia no fixa is better than a no fixa Verschmelz. Same with the Obsidia, Rugged Citadel version, and just others across the board. So a lot of you are using this combination of Slayer and then just whatever class you are. So maybe the Verschmelz isn't quite for you, unless if you're really trying to grind it out for that Growthment, which that would take maybe like 100 runs or so of that Lucille exploration. Once again, though, this is highly dependent on your add-on skills in addition to your augmenting. If I lower the crit damage, then the Verschmelz is going to lose out even more, and all these other weapons are going to be way better. But then if I lower the crit rate from Braver, if you don't have a high skill with that, then it's going to start losing out on these other weapons. They're going to kind of return to what it was like with the No Slayer. Another thing to keep in mind is that this does not include the down critical hit rate from Slayer. So if the enemy was downed, then you're getting the crit rate from that add-on skill too, which is going to help every other weapon in the game and not the Verschmelz at all. So during downs, every other weapon is going to be better. So that's something to keep in mind, because you might, during downs, switch over to something else for those and then switch back to Verschmelz when the boss is up. Let's take a look at the final sheet, where this is you playing as a Slayer main. We're getting all this critical rate up even higher. So 5% from the critical up, 5% from the Gallant crit, and then some from the Gunblade focus, and then maybe some other things with like the Rage, the Unleash Rage ability. Looking at this already, you can probably see that everything else in the game is in green, while Verschmelz is just down here below. Even if we do a Termina 1 version of the Verschmelz, it's not going to look too great. Like, it kind of gets closer in comparison, but even no fix of almost everything else in the game is going to be better than the Verschmelz. So I wouldn't even bother with the Verschmelz at all if you're a Slayer main, because you're just getting so much crit rate from your class that doesn't affect this weapon. The only times where I've seen this gets a little bit better for you as a Slayer is if you have like no add-on skill with the crit rate for Braver, which isn't really likely to be happening because you can at least get a minimum of 10 with the guarantee eventually. But yeah, even the Asherin with no add-on skill with the Braver still is better than a Termina 1 Verschmelz. So I would just definitely not recommend this weapon at all if you play Slayers. Don't even bother with the Gunblade in the slightest. But yeah, that's everything for this Verschmelz weapon series. It's definitely an interesting one. I guess one more thing is, if the Fix of Fatale can end up being on this weapon, it's not going to do anything at all because it's just extra crit rate, and you can see that it's no different from a non-fixed version. But as a thing to wrap this up as like a recommendation summary, if you haven't been using Slayer at all already, this is a pretty solid weapon even at no fixa. The only thing I look out for is if your add-on skills are imbalanced, where you have a high crit rate Braver skill, like nothing for your crit damage. You can kind of make up for that with a Termina 1 guarantee out of that Growth Mint shop. The same kind of goes for the Slayer sub when you compare it that way. It's just like you almost need that Termina 1 version over the non-fixa. But then for Slayer, just don't even bother. Just don't even bother, like I said. But yeah, that's everything that I have. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.